The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales radio show, your fortnightly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. And now here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to all of you in paranormal radio and podcast land. This is our 13th show. Our ghostly drummer boys drumming, playing Led Zeppelin backwards to raise the devil, all you ever wanted to know about the folklore of hares and what's so unlucky about the number 13 anyway show. And now, here's Janie.
Well, hello, and we've another busy show for you, so let's start with anniversaries.
We've two for you this week. The first is the 1st of March, 1692, which saw the arrest of the first three suspects in what would become the Salem witch trials. The unlucky trio, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne and Tituba, had all the characteristics of being the usual suspects in witchcraft trials. Good was a homeless beggar, Osborne seldom attended church meetings, and Tituba, being a South American Indian slave, was a clear outsider who even gave lessons in fortune-telling. Tituba was imprisoned but subsequently released and vanished into obscurity. Osborne died in prison, and Good was hanged, but not before first cursing the Reverend Nicholas Noyes, the official church minister for the trials. This is what Good said: "I'm no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." 25 years later, Noyes died from internal bleeding, in effect, drinking his own blood.
Well, I just hope the second anniversary is a little more cheery.
It is. It's, as the old Ready Steady Go used to say, the weekend starts here. The year is AD 321. The date is the 7th of March, and the Roman Empire's only Yorkshireman turned emperor, Constantine the Great. OK, he wasn't a real Yorkshireman, he was just declared emperor when he was in York. He was actually an Illyrian, which in today's money makes him a Croat or an Albanian. Anyway, Constantine declared that Deis Solis Invicta, the day of the unconquered sun god, or Sunday, was to become the official day of rest within the Roman Empire, and so the weekend was born.
Talking of anniversaries, I see this is our 13th show, and I know there's a lot of superstition that's connected with the number 13. You know, you get that thing where it's bad luck and hotels won't have a room 13, and in some cases they don't even have a 13th floor, do they? So that they have like floor 12, and then the next one is the 14th floor.
Yes.
So I just wondered, you know, what's all that about?
Well, it's an odd one because initially 13 was thought to be a lucky number. When you get the phrase a baker's dozen, you're getting an extra one, you're getting 12 plus 1. And it was even thought that it was a lucky number because it was basically Jesus leading the gang of the 12 disciples. However, sometime round about the end of the 17th century, it suddenly became a superstition that if you had 13 people for dinner, this was bad luck because either the first person to leave the table or the last person to join the table would likely to die in the following 12 months. This led to this sort of superstition of, if you got 13, that you had an extra place setting. So you had 14 there. The Savoy Hotel in London still has to this day a black wooden cat called Caspar. It adds to any of the tables where there are 13 diners.
We're a funny lot, really, aren't we, the English? So, I mean, how did it start, the tradition at the Savoy? I mean, what initially kicked it off for them to go to all that trouble?
It was because in 1898, a certain Wolf Joel, a South African mining millionaire, hosted a dinner at the hotel. But because of a last-minute cancellation, it meant there were only 13 people attending. Now, Joel apparently scoffed at talk that the first person to leave the table would encounter bad luck, and to prove his guests were wrong, he got up and left first. Strangely enough, on his return to Johannesburg, he was shot dead. As a result, the Savoy introduced a situation where there'd never ever be just 13 diners at the table. And apparently when he was dining at the Savoy, Winston Churchill always insisted a place be laid for the cat, no matter how many people were at the table.
Right. Yeah. That's quite a good story then, really, isn't it? Apart from the guy getting shot, obviously.
Yeah,
Not
well, I say
certain on that.
it starts off when the 17th century, when they were a little bit heavy into religion, because with the Last Supper, the first person to leave was Judas Iscariot, who then went and hanged himself. So this is where the idea
right,
that it was that it'd be bad luck.
Oh, that's what I was wondering, where it all really started, what the origins are. Now I know.
and I've read reports that during sort of the 19th century, there'd be quite elaborate rituals whereby if you were 13 people, it would be coordinated so everyone sat down at once, so there would be no last person joining. And when it came to the end of the meal, everyone would stand up at the same time.
When did that die out then, or I've never encountered that.
Well, that's because you're not a Victorian.
Oh, okay.
It's one of those oldie things, but I'm sure in places we never get invited, people still all...
That's what I was getting at. As a sort of, is it something posh people do? Which we
I think
don't?
it's
Okay.
what posh daft people do.
Oh, okay.
That would be the technical term. I'm not sure how it works if you want to go to the loo in the middle of the
That's
meal.
a good point.
Do you all get up and trail there?
Bring on the wooden cat.
Exactly.
You are listening to the Weird Tales Radio Show with Charles Christian on internet radio and podcast.
One of the enduring urban myths of the rock music industry is that if you play the Led Zeppelin track Stairway to Heaven backwards, you will hear a prayer to Satan. So, purely in the spirit of academic research, let's see what happens. Incidentally, we're not playing the full track, as that's about 8 minutes long, and there is a limit to how much anyone might want to hear Robert Plant apparently singing in Moroccan or Russian. Besides which, a lot of the track is taken up with instrumental anyway. Did you hear it? The controversial bit comes at the point in the song, when the track is being played the right way around, where Robert Plant is singing, "If there's a bustle in the hedgerow, it's just a spring cleaning for the May Queen." The backstory is in the early 1980s, a number of American TV and radio evangelists, or right-wing religious nutjobs as we prefer to call them in the UK, became obsessed with the idea that various rock bands were deliberately burying demonic subliminal messages in their tracks using a process called backmasking. You can hear true backmasking in use at the end of the Beatles track Rain, where they replay the chorus backwards. Rain, by the way, is the B-side of their 1966 single Paperback Writer. Now apparently the reason Led Zeppelin was singled out is that back in 1913, Aleister Crowley, a character who regularly crops up on this show, suggested anyone interested in black magic would do well to learn how to think and speak backwards. So it's official. There is a backmasking Satanism connection. And then, about 60 years later, a man who was known to have an interest in the occult, namely Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page, bought Crowley's old house by Loch Ness. So, there you have it. There's a connection between Aleister Crowley, Led Zeppelin and Satanism. So, what are the reverse Led Zeppelin lyrics supposed to say? Oh, here's to my sweet Satan, the one whose little path would make me sad, whose power is Satan. He'll give those with him 666. There was a little tool shed where he made us suffer. Sad Satan. I mean, really? Seriously? Now, if this was meant to be some form of black magic invocation, it all goes steadily pear-shaped after the first few words. Oh, here's to my sweet Satan. Yeah, that makes sense. But the rest is just twaddle. He'll give those with him a 666. What does that mean? Is a 666 a giant version of a 99 ice cream cone? And what is Satan doing in a little tool shed? Makes him sound like some kind of depressed lawnmower repairman. Why is he being sad? However, on a more serious note, there is an issue here, namely that when the human mind hears a garbled sound, it will try to make sense of it by searching for recognisable patterns in the noise. But there's more. Numerous experiments have also shown that if somebody gives the listener a prompt or clue as to what they should be hearing, then the listener's mind will filter the sounds and recognise those words or phrases that have been suggested. It's what psychologists call pareidolia, and it is why people also hear spooky noises when they hear just normal mundane sounds but are in a house they've been told is haunted. Furthermore, it's not just sound. Pareidolia can apply to all these senses, including sight. This is why people see the face of Jesus on a slice of toast, or at least they see the face of Jesus on a slice of toast after you point out to them that where it is. The reality is they didn't actually see it the first time, but because they were told it was there, then suddenly it becomes obvious. And so it is with music. If you listened to some of Stairway being played backwards and did not know about the supposed satanic message, you might just detect the phrase "Yish to my shweezaidan" about 3 minutes 30 seconds in. If I told you the phrase actually is "I'll see you at the station," you'd nod your head and say, "Wow, it does." But because we're talking about satanic verses, you will hear the word Satan. Anyway, here's that controversial bit again, and then we're going to play the track the conventional way. And just remember, Lorne Core Even Null is Long Live Rock and Roll backwards.
There's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold, and she's buying the stairway to heaven. When she gets there, she knows if the stores are all closed, with the word she sign on the wall, but she wants to be sure, 'cause you know sometimes words have two meanings. In a tree by the brook, there's a songbird who sings. Sometimes all of our thoughts are misgiven. There's a feeling I get when I look to the west, and my spirit is crying for leaving. In my thoughts I have seen rings of smoke through the trees, and the voices of those who stand looking. Soon, if we all call the tune, then the piper will lead us to reason, and a new day will dawn for those who stand long, and the forests will echo with laughter. Just a sprinkling for the May Queen. Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. And it makes me wonder, in case you don't know, the piper's calling you to join him. Dear lady, can you hear the wind blow? And did you know your stairway lies on the whispering wind?
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, part of the Paranormal UK radio network.
And now here's Janie again, and it being March, this time she's talking about hares, the sort our American listeners would call jackrabbits.
Yes, so have you ever thought about hares? And I don't mean the stray ones older ladies get, included, or lack of them if male. No, I mean the mystical rabbit-like animal, the brown, long ears, very fast, always pictured looking at the moon. I've been fascinated as to just why they, because they're just basically a big bunny rabbit, have so much folklore and superstition about them. Mm-hmm. And I've gained new respect for this magical beast.
Ooh.
Yes,
Tell
indeed.
us more.
Right. Well, it did make me think, where did this aura of magic and mysticism start? And why, in fact, are they often shown with the moon in the background? The idea does go back to ancient times, and it relates to the moon's waxing and waning, and therefore death and rebirth of the moon. And the hare is connected with fertility, for other reasons. So perhaps because of this, maybe, I don't know. Though it's also thought that they were of neither sex, that's hares, and even changed sex from year to year. So they didn't quite understand a few biological things, did they? But I just did wonder whether they got this connection with the moon and being pictured with the moon, because they're mainly nocturnal, and I suppose then they'd often be seen at night in an open field, which would be their preferred habitat, so they kind of stand out staring at the moon, which, because it's full and therefore they can be seen, well, it was assumed there was a connection, sort of again cause and effect, muddled around a bit. Hares do also represent new life in the spring, because after a long winter, because they're evident as they gather in open fields and they start to play and dance and do that boxing thing as part of their mating behaviour, like as in Mad as a March Hare. So there'd be like the first sign, I think, that spring is coming, new life. Their history, though, and their folklore is far weirder, with some universal myths about them going back to ancient times from all parts of the world, which was quite a surprise, because I thought it was perhaps just in Suffolk that we liked hares. Apparently not. Even Hinduism and Buddhism have the hare that can be seen in the moon.
Ooh.
Yeah, and hare mythology is found in Africa and China. See? So I'm going to look out for the outline of the hare in the moon.
Instead of the man in the moon.
Yeah. Has anybody else noticed that out there? Yeah? Charles? Because you look at the moon a lot, don't you?
I do indeed.
Have you seen the hare in the moon?
No, but I'm usually baying at that time.
That's true.
So.
Of course you are. I'm trying to get out the coffin thing. Anyway. Medieval science apparently believed the hare was a melancholy animal and was meant to cause the same in anyone who ate it. And I must admit, they do often look to me a bit depressed, but when you look into their history, as I will tell you, that's not too surprising, because there's some pretty bad stuff as well as good stuff. Let's start with Easter. Teutonic myth says the goddess Oestra, or Iestra, was hare-headed. Yeah, she gave her name to the Easter festival, and her hare laid the Easter egg. The original Easter bunny was in fact a hare. But here the source and the myths of the Easter connection is a bit murky and unsubstantiated. But there is a verified source, no less than Julius Caesar, who is quoted as saying the hare is sacred in Britain. He noticed that when he came here. And he reported that Boudica, or Boadicea, who was a queen of a British tribe who fought against the Romans when they occupied Britain, that she would release her psychic hare, before a battle to predict the outcome. So if it ran one way, she would triumph, and if it ran the opposite way, they would lose. So they probably just went home.
Yeah.
There's many more myths on the portent of which way hares ran, predicting good or bad luck.
Oh, right.
Too numerous to mention, actually. Well, it occurs to me that hares didn't really have very good early public relations, because there's so many references to quite nasty associations with witches and such like. What do you ask? I hear you all say. Well, for instance, it was believed in medieval times that witches changed themselves into hares to steal milk. Or just because they could. Or when they were not fancying turning themselves into black cats. So there was that connection. White hares, which would be their kind of winter coat, were thought to be ghosts of women who had been let down by beastly men. Surprisingly, or maybe not, there are a host of eating taboos about hares reported as early as 50 BC. Again from Caesar. The Britons do not eat hares, because he said they hold them sacred as well. So. The melancholy myth that you could become melancholy if you ate them.
Yes.
That's another myth. And there are many other references through history about not eating them, as they may give you the palsy.
Oh.
And funnily enough, my history lessons at school left me with the impression all medieval folk, all day long, was jugged hare, roast swans and lashings of mead. But apparently not. I tell you, this is how bad their reputation was. The actual word hare was taboo and must never be said, particularly near fishermen. As was, to be fair, the same with the word rabbit. I know it's just getting more ridiculous, but this is all true. There are numerous references to sailors and fishermen turning back from going to sea if they saw a hare on the way to going to their boat, or burning their nets if a hare was found in them. Yes, I know, I did think it was a bit hard to see how that could possibly happen.
Yes.
But these were ancient times.
They were.
Anyway, however, it was said to be unlucky to kill a hare, so at least they had something on their side. They were also a portent of fire. And there were reports from the mid-1800s of hares running down the road away from the site of a fire. And other reports of just seeing hares bringing bad luck, as fire would shortly follow. Or were they just smart enough to be heading out of the way of a
from
fire?
the fire,
Yeah.
yes.
So again, a bit of cause and effect got muddled up. But it was also unlucky to meet a hare, even if you weren't a fisherman. And in 1507, there's a saying, in fact there's many sayings, in Old English saying, "I say to you as a gospel, that when one goeth on his way, and if he encounters a hare, it is an evil sign, and you should return home immediately." Blah, 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 blah. And if a hare crossed the path of a pregnant woman, it could cause her child to be born with a hare lip.
Oh,
Unless, this you do wonder about this, don't you? Unless someone quickly cut or tore some of her clothes off to prevent the ill luck. It was meant to sort of let the evil luck out of her clothes.
Yes.
Goes without saying it was unlucky for a lady with a child to eat them. All no doubt adding to why eating them was generally a bad idea. So maybe their original PR department wasn't that useless. It was putting everybody off eating them.
Yes.
It just occurs to me now how times have changed, because now we'd look out for them, wouldn't we? And we'd consider them a wonderful lucky treat to see. Especially, it's a really amazing sight if you see them running, and they can do up to 35 miles per hour.
You saw some recently, didn't you?
Yeah, incredible sight, really. They were doing the boxing, and sort of 4 of them leaping around. Marvellous. On a nature note,
Yes.
because we have to just bring it back to some facts, don't we? They're now declining, caused, it's thought, by farmers taking silage several times a year from grass fields, as opposed to cutting fields once for hay. See, time moves on. Well, the little baby leverets, as they're called, they're always born above ground, And of course they don't survive 3 or 4 cuts with the... Ooh, doesn't bear thinking about, does it? Anyway. Oh, just going back now, if you did see a hare when you were out and about, in ancient times, olden days, medieval times, actually even right up, it was said even right up until sort of 18th, 19th century, there was a way to set matters right and continue on your way unharmed if you spat over your left shoulder and said a little rhyme, thus, hare before, trouble behind, change ye cross and free me. Don't quite understand that. But you could also touch each shoulder with your finger and say, hare, hare, God send thee care. Well,
Yeah.
you know, might as well, mightn't you? It's not
Right.
costing you anything,
Exactly,
is it?
yes.
Anyway, slowly, it does seem their association with bad luck changes through time to good positive stuff. And then, it was a couple of centuries ago, I suppose still it started, it was thought a hare's foot could help cramp, rheumatiz, and protect it against witchcraft. And then this started to include rabbit's feet being lucky for everything, apparently.
Except for rabbits.
Yeah, that was my punchline.
Oh,
Anyway, never mind. There is still a belief in Britain that at the end of the month, to bring good luck, you should say rabbits, rabbits, rabbits 3 times on the last night of the month. And then the next morning, before you get up, say hares, hares, hares. So that's the hare for you. And they didn't have a good start, but now, of course, they're beloved of artists and trinket makers and card makers everywhere. But there's a lot more to them than you think. Did you know any of that? I suppose you did know it. You probably knew. No?
no.
You didn't?
I fell over a hare once. I was out walking the dog in one of the fields, and you know, they do that thing where they sort of make a little nest, and it was during the day, and I stumbled across it, and I looked at the hare, and the hare looked at me, and I did what any right-thinking person would do. I screamed, and the hare got up and ran off in the opposite direction.
35 miles an hour.
At 35 miles an hour.
That's a very unusual thing to happen. Mind you, I did read, they have no defence really against anything because they don't go into burrows. Their only defence is to lie flat on the ground, motionless, ears sort of clamped down on their back. So that's what he was giving that one a whirl to see if that one worked. That's why that happened.
And of course, some of our listeners may have spotted we've recently changed our logo to a hare with a tabor, which is a little hand drum, a bit like a Irish bodhran. I found a reference to it. The hare of the tabor is a phantasmagorical character that appears in Ben Jonson's play Bartholomew Fair in 1641, where he reports of the bull with 5 legs, the dogs that dance the morris, and the hare of the tabor.
I wondered where he came.
It's a little image from the Harleian Library in the British Museum, and it dates back to the late 14th, early 15th century.
I see him as more of a modern hare, a lucky one.
A lucky one,
Yes.
yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
A couple of shows ago, we were talking to the writer Evie King. In a part of the interview we didn't have time to carry, Evie mentioned a writers' group she runs called the Albino Pineapples. The name is derived from an albino master criminal who can never be traced because, having once worked in the pineapple canning industry, she has no fingerprints. Now, this is a long-running urban myth. It was even featured on an episode of the UK TV quiz show IQ, that because pineapples contain an enzyme called bromelain, which is also used as a meat tenderizer, anyone who spends a long time with their fingers immersed in pineapple juice will lose their fingerprints because the bromelain dissolves them. But is this actually true? The answer is a resounding no. Exposure to pineapple juice does not remove your fingerprints. It may make them a little less prominent, but they will still be there and they will soon grow back to their former glory. Fingerprints, it transpires, are notoriously resilient, and even if you injure or burn your fingertips, the prints will eventually grow back. In fact, just about the only surefire way to obliterate your fingertips is to cut off the end of your fingers. Something not to be recommended for any would-be criminal masterminds, as it's going to severely crimp your dexterity and make you even easier to identify in a police lineup. Looking into this subject further, we found that bricklayers and people who work with lime, the building mortar, not the fruit, also have less distinct fingerprints because the rough work and the chemicals wears down the ridges on their prints. Even secretaries and bank cashiers have also reported the symptoms, as the continuous handling of paper has a similar effect on fingerprints. More seriously, patients undergoing chemotherapy for some types of cancer may suffer a condition called hand-foot syndrome, or chemotherapy-induced acral erythema, which can cause swelling, pain and peeling on the palms and soles of the feet, and apparently loss of fingerprints. However, once again, it is a temporary condition and the prints will eventually be back. However, following a situation in 2008 when a cancer patient from Singapore who'd flown to the United States was detained by security at a US airport because he had no readable fingerprints. All visitors to the US, you probably know, have to have their fingerprints taken by the TSA on arrival. It's now recommended that if you are undergoing chemo, you may want to obtain an explanatory letter from your consultant before flying to the US. But for all you would-be master criminals out there, there is hope. Apparently, as you age, the elasticity of skin decreases. The result is a lot of senior citizens, or what we call old age pensioners in the UK, have prints that are difficult to capture. The ridges get thicker, the height between the top of the ridge and the bottom of the furrow gets narrower, so there's less prominence. The result is, if there's any pressure at all on the fingerprint scanner, the prints will just be a smear.
So, who are our candidates for ghostly hauntings in tonight's show, Charles? I believe we've got some kind of drums and drumming theme going on, have we?
We do indeed, and we start with a local ghost, well, relatively local for us, about 40 minutes drive from where we are in this studio.
Really?
Oh yes.
I'm all ears.
Good. It's the ghostly drummer of Hickling Broad, near the town of Potterham on the Norfolk Broads. The story is, in the winter before the Battle of Waterloo, so we're talking the year 1815, a young drummer boy, home on leave from the army, fell in love with a young woman who was the daughter of a local wealthy farmer. The farmer didn't like the idea of having a soldier for a son-in-law, so the couple would meet in secret, and, it being a very cold winter...
A bit like it is at the moment here, for us monkeys.
Yep. The young drummer would skate across the ice-covered Hickling Broad to meet his girlfriend on the other side, and to let her know he was on his way, he'd give a little roll on his drum. But then, one night, towards the end of February, tragedy struck when the ice gave way, pitching the drummer boy into the pitch-black icy water, where he drowned. The legend goes on to say that around 7 p.m. on misty February evenings, the phantom skater appears through the gloom, still beating a tattoo on his drum as he tries to summon his long-lost sweetheart.
Oh, that's so sad. Sad story.
It is.
Well, I have a ghostly drummer tale for you. And this one is located in Richmond. That's the one in Yorkshire, not the one in Surrey. It's an important distinction for any would-be ghost hunters out there that go to the wrong place, you see. Anyway, the story is that towards the end of the 18th century, some soldiers stationed in Richmond Castle found the entrance to an old tunnel. There's a legend of a tunnel connecting the castle with the now ruined Easby Abbey, about 1.5 miles away, dating back to the times when the Scottish frequently raided the area. And the tunnel would have allowed the monks to secretly escape from the abbey into the safety of the castle. So they suspect suspected there might be buried treasure down there, as one inevitably would, possibly from the Reformation, when the monks at Easby would have wanted to hide the gold and silver crosses and all the chalices belonging to the abbey. So they decided to explore it.
As you would.
Unfortunately, the tunnel was too narrow for an adult, anyway, to crawl through. So they volunteered one of the young regimental drummer boys to explore the tunnel for them. And after he was lowered into the tunnel, he was told to beat his drum as he went, so they could follow his course from above the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sound of the drumming led them away from the castle, across the marketplace, in the direction of French Gate, and beside the River Swale, heading toward Easby. But when the soldiers reached Easby Wood, half a mile from the abbey, the drumming stopped, and the drummer boy was never seen again. So whether the roof had fallen in, perhaps as a result of vibrations caused by the drumming, we don't really know. It is said that on quiet winter days you can still hear the sound of the drumming. Yeah. And obviously not wanting to miss out on a tourist opportunity, there's now an official drummer boy 3-mile walk, how cheery, taking you in a circular route from the castle across the town along the banks of the river to the drummer boy stone, which marks the spot where the poor lad was last heard drumming, then on to Easby Abbey and back to the castle, no doubt via the drummer boy cafe and trinket shop.
I hope they do scones. I'll add it to my bucket list. And before we go, I'll also offer you our third and final ghostly drummer boy story of the night. For this one, we head over to Tennessee in the United States for the tale of the ghostly drummer boy of Shiloh. Listeners of a southern states persuasion may want to turn away now, as this is a battle the Confederacy lost in April 1862. The story is, on the second day of the battle, a young drummer boy attached to General Buell's Union Army was ordered to sound the attack on his drum. This he did, but a few minutes later the Union troops, storming a strategic hilltop, were cut down by heavy gunfire, so his commanding officer ordered him to play retreat. But instead of playing retreat, he played attack again. When his commanding officer asked him why he was playing the wrong drum roll, the boy replied that he was so new at the job he only knew one tune, and that was attack. As it happens, spurred on by the boy's stirring drum beats, the Union soldiers regrouped, renewed the attack, and captured the hill from the Confederates. When the battle was over, the drummer boy's commanding officer wanted to personally thank the boy for saving the day, but then he learned the young boy had not survived the battle, but had been shot through the chest later in the fight. It's a sad little story, and not surprisingly, it is said you can still hear the ghostly sound of the boy's drum rolls playing across the meadows of the old Shiloh battlefield.
I tried to learn the drums, as you well know, and funnily enough, I could only ever learn 2 beats.
And they were?
Well, not attack, obviously, but rock beat, and actually I think the other one was disco beat, and they were broadly similar. And my brain just wouldn't let me learn any new beats, so I had great sympathy for him.
Yes.
Poor lad.
Yes. And just on a little final note there, although we don't know the identity of the drummer boy, and for a long time it was thought this was purely a anecdotal tale, in 1940 roadworks in the Shiloh area uncovered the skeleton of a young boy who'd been shot through the chest, and there were still pieces of drum strap draped around his neck.
Ooh.
We've carried several stories over the weeks about looming apocalypses and end-of-the-world scenarios, so for a change, for our next piece of music, we've a song about the apocalypse. It's a track by the late 1960s, early 1970s Greek prog rock supergroup. Yes, I did say Greek, no sniggering at the back, they were a real thing. The group were called Aphrodite's Child, and they were definitely no relation to Destiny's Child. The lineup included Vangelis Papathanasiou on keyboards and the late Demis Roussos on bass guitar and vocals. Today Vangelis is better known for his movie soundtracks, including the original Blade Runner movie and Chariots of Fire, for which he won an Oscar. The track, The Four Horsemen, is from their third and final album, 666, a concept album based on the biblical Book of Revelations, which was released in 1972.
Find us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or email us at urbanfantasist@icloud.com or follow us on Twitter at Christian Uncut.
For this next story, Janie, you don't have to do anything but sit back and listen. 45-year-old mother of 5, Mrs. Amanda Teague of Downpatrick in Northern Ireland, who works as a professional Captain Jack Sparrow impersonator, had a pregnancy scare shortly after her second marriage. Nothing unusual there, you might think, and as it happens, it turned out to be a false alarm. However, what is unusual is that her second husband is the ghost of a 17th century Haitian pirate called Jack Teague. Amanda, who has recently been featured in the Sun newspaper and on the Loose Women TV show, said her relationship began one night in 2014 when she was lying alone in bed and felt his energy appear beside her. She added that sex with a ghost was surprisingly similar to sex with a real man. Anyway, after a couple of years of dating, the couple decided to get married, and to circumvent the fact that a posthumous marriage, as in a marriage to a person who is dead, is not lawful in the UK, dressed in a white bridal gown and accompanied by her bridesmaids, a registrar and a spiritual medium who did the talking on behalf of her dead fiancé, on the 23rd of July 2016, the wedding party headed out into international waters off Ireland and held a marriage ceremony. We'll gloss over the fact the only pirate called Teague I can find any record of is Captain Edward Teague, and he is a fictional character from the Pirates of the Caribbean movie franchise. In fact, he's Jack Sparrow's father, played in the movies by Rolling Stone Keith Richards. However, before we leave this story, while posthumous marriages are unlawful in the UK and the Republic of Ireland, Mrs. Teague is an Irish citizen, under Article 171 of the French Civil Code, and I quote, "The President of France can, on serious grounds, authorise the celebration of a marriage in the event of the death of one of the future spouses, provided there is sufficient evidence of their consent. In such cases, the rights and obligations relating to marriage go back to the day before the date of the spouse's death."
And this was in the Sun, you say?
And on television.
Oh, but originally from the Sun.
Mm.
Oh, well, I'm not saying that the Sun would carry anything that wasn't true. It just might be slightly embroidered. There's so many questions about that story that.
And apparently now she and her ghostly husband go on double dates with one of her friends who is dating one of Captain Teague's fellow shipmates as well. And they go to a pub and they have drinks and they buy shots of rum for their ghostly partners.
Did they have a prenup agreement?
I think they probably did. That she gets the pirate ship.
Yeah. I'd like to see the pictures, that's all I'm saying.
Hello, that's the sound of my late great Uncle Samson banging on the studio Ouija board to tell me we're nearly out of time. But before we go, one last story. Just a few days ago, the end of February, the Vatican announced it was setting up a new training course for priests wanting to improve their exorcism skills. It was set up to cope with demand after the number of requests for exorcisms tripled in Italy over the space of a few years. Sicilian priest and trained exorcist Benigno Paglia told Vatican Radio that novices should leave training in the art of exorcism to professionals and not attempt the expulsion of evil spirits without appropriate supervision. Father Paglia blamed the rise in demand for exorcism on the growing number of people seeking services of fortune tellers and tarot card readers. Such practices, he said, opened the door to the devil and to possession. If you're interested in the course, you will have to buy your own exorcise books, and fees are subject to a 20% VAT decant. However, you can pay by PayPal. I know, that's enough bad puns. Janie and I will be back in 2 weeks' time. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon.
Which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your fortnightly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic and folklore. Keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or by email at urbanfantasist@icloud.com and on Twitter at Christian Uncut. Good night. Join us again in 2 weeks' time for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show.